They handed me a $50,000 check in front of everyone and said it was a gift, but it came with strings. You'll co-sign the new gallery lease, Dad smiled. It's your investment, too. I looked at the check, then at the family who had drained me dry for years, and I said, I'm not co-signing anything. You never asked, you just expected. Hi, I'm Jenna. For years, I was the quiet one, the helper, the peacemaker, the financial safety net. But that night, I finally said no. Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way, I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. I stood just inside the entrance, pressing name cards into the folded holders I'd brought from home. The gold script looked elegant against the matte cream paper. Elaine had insisted on that particular combination after seeing it on Pinterest. I printed them at the office on my lunch break, careful not to smudge the ink. No one knew that, of course. The gallery was glowing, literally. Warm Edison bulbs hung in clusters above the tables, giving everything a golden wash. Exposed brick walls, linen-draped display stands, and minimalist flower arrangements made it feel like we were dining inside a magazine spread. The hors d'oeuvres had names I couldn't pronounce and ingredients I didn't recognize. I hadn't touched them. My stomach was tight. Guests floated around the room holding champagne flutes filled with something fizzy and pink. I overheard one woman say it was a fermented rhubarb cocktail, locally made. That tracked. A lot of things tonight were locally made, including the artist. My sister, Elaine. She moved through the crowd like a seasoned host, all grace and curated charm. Her linen jumpsuit hugged her perfectly, and the tiny crystal pendant on her neck caught the light just so. Someone handed her a glass of champagne, and she raised it like she was born for the toast. I kept working quietly, placing the last few cards before someone tapped me lightly on the shoulder. "Excuse me," a woman in black with a headset whispered. "Could you bring out more napkins to the main bar?" I blinked at her. "I'm not," I started to say, but she was already moving on, apologizing to someone else for the lack of lemon slices. I stood there for a moment, trying to remember when I had started blending in so well that people mistook me for staff. Probably around the time I started paying for everything. Dad once said, family takes care of each other. But somehow, that always meant me taking care of them. No one ever questioned it. It was just a silent understanding. Jenna will cover it. Jenna's doing fine. Elaine's voice rang out over the music, bright and warm. "Can I steal your attention for just a sec?" she called out. The room responded immediately like a stage cue. She stepped onto a small riser near the front, raising her glass with the practiced poise of someone who knew how to draw every eye. "I just want to say thank you," she began, "to everyone who showed up tonight to celebrate not just the launch of my gallery, but this dream I've been nurturing for so long." She paused, her smile wide and shimmering. And of course, I couldn't have done it without my sister, our family's personal ATM. Polite laughter. A ripple, soft at first, then more confident. I felt my ears flush, but I forced a smile. That's what I always did. Smile. Be a good sport. "She's not just an ATM," Dad chimed in from somewhere near the punch bowl. "She prints 20s like magic." That got a bigger laugh. Someone clapped. Elaine beamed, looking every bit the golden child. I glanced down at my shoes, the same nude heels I'd worn to Carla's wedding 2 years ago. One of the straps had started to fray, but only on the inside where no one could see. Much like me, I supposed. I made my way to the back of the room, away from the main crowd. My glass of kombucha had gone flat. I sipped it anyway, tasting a mix of elderflower and resentment. "You must be so proud of her," someone said beside me, a woman I didn't recognize but who had clearly been drinking. "She's done this all on her own, hasn't she?" I opened my mouth, then closed it, nodded instead. There was no point. I leaned against the brick wall and watched the projections of Elaine's art play across a canvas screen. abstract shapes moved in slow motion, accompanied by ambient music she probably found from a Scandinavian sound library. It was beautiful, it was expensive, and it was paid for. The lights dimmed slightly as dessert trays came out. I didn't remember agreeing to pay for the mini cheesecakes or lavender shortbread, but I recognized the bakery from the invoices. Somewhere in my inbox, I had the credit card statement to prove it. Elaine breezed by me, laughing with a group of women wearing matching gold rings. She smelled like lavender and white amber, her signature perfume. She paused just long enough to look over her shoulder and wink. "You'll love what we've got planned for you later," she said, voice teasing. My stomach twisted. I smiled again, the corners of my mouth aching. And just like that, the room erupted in applause once more. I sat on the edge of my bed, with one shoe still on and the gallery still echoing in my head. The laughter, the flicker of gold lights, the smell of lavender and citrus clinging to my sleeves like I'd been dipped in someone else's life. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just emptied. Like a bank account you forget to close, but the monthly fees keep nibbling at it until one day it's just gone. I kicked off the other shoe and let it thud against the floor. My apartment was quiet. Not the peaceful kind, more like the stillness of a room that had been waiting too long for someone to come home. The air smelled faintly of overripe bananas and the granola I kept meaning to finish. I opened the fridge. Half a carton of eggs, a bottle of almond milk I suspected had turned, and a few containers I was afraid to open. I closed it again. Sitting at the kitchen table, I opened my bank app. The glow of the screen lit up my face in the dark. I scrolled past the usual bills until the charges began to blur. Catering, $2,340. Floral invoice, $1,150. Airbnb rooms for special guests, $900. There were over $9,000 in charges that didn't belong to me, except they did. My card, my name, my burden. I grabbed my laptop and opened a blank spreadsheet. At the top, I typed, "Unpaid family expenses." The words looked sterile, professional, like they belonged to someone else, but each row I added brought me back to a memory I had tried to archive in the back of my mind, the tuition. I hadn't thought about that night in years, but now, like a bruise pressed too hard, it came back. It was late, 2017. I was sitting on the floor of my old studio apartment eating a bowl of dollar ramen with the heater blasting because the windows never sealed right. Elaine called me on FaceTime. Her eyes were puffy and she sniffled dramatically. "They accepted me," she said. "The holistic arts program in Santa Cruz. It's everything I wanted." I smiled genuinely at first. "That's amazing, Lane. But I need to put down the deposit by Friday and I don't have it." She didn't ask right away. She just kept talking about chakras and healing and how this was finally her path. "How much?" I asked, already knowing. "10,000, she said softly. "Just to start." I was exhausted from working late. My paycheck hadn't even cleared yet, but I logged into my savings account anyway and transferred the full amount. That night, I ate the ramen dry because I'd run out of broth packets. She mailed me a sticky note a week later. I found it tonight, stuck between the pages of an old tax document. It read, "You're the best. I promise I'll pay it back. Love, Lane." I stared at it for a moment, then tossed it in the trash. My phone buzzed. Leora. I debated answering. She always knew when something was off. I clicked accept, keeping my voice light. "Hey," I said. "How'd it go?" she asked, voice soft and warm. "Oh, you know, fancy lighting, weird hors d'oeuvres, kombucha instead of wine." She chuckled. "Sounds like a Portland dream." "Totally. Jenna, I'm fine." The silence on the other end told me she didn't buy it, but she let it go because that's what good friends do. They don't press when they know you're on the edge of unraveling. After we hung up, I opened Instagram. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see if anyone had posted a group photo or if Elaine had mentioned me in the caption. The first story that loaded was hers. She was at brunch. A pristine plate of eggs Benedict with avocado roses and microgreens. The caption read, "Energy deserves investment." Self-love. Healing is wealth. In the bottom corner of the photo, I saw it. A receipt. My name. My card. Again. The same card I'd used to order groceries and pay late fees last month. I zoomed in to be sure. Last 4 digits matched. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. It wasn't the spending that hurt. It was the ease. The public comfort with a lie I was still paying for. She thrived. I evaporated. I opened the spreadsheet again. Added a row. Brunch at Flora Cafe. $68.24. Description. Eggs and entitlement. I sat back, blinking at the numbers. It wasn't betrayal I felt. It was recognition. The kind that lives in the quiet, in the years you spent swallowing instead of speaking. Then my phone buzzed again. Elaine. Dad wants to give you something tomorrow. Come early. No context, no apology, no awareness. I stared at the message, and then I closed my laptop, stood in the middle of the room, and just breathed. Slowly. Like I hadn't done it for myself in years. The envelope was thick. Not just in weight, but in meaning. The kind of envelope that doesn't say, "Thank you," but "Here's what we expect next." It sat in my lap like a loaded question. The gallery felt different tonight. Same space, but softened somehow. The lights were dimmed to a deeper gold, shadows stretching longer across the walls. Guests sipped champagne and posed for group photos beneath a string of fairy lights. Everything looked perfect, curated. Like a lifestyle ad you might scroll past on a Sunday evening when you're trying not to feel left out. Elaine floated through the room again, all angles and grace. Her white linen now swapped for a softer dove gray. She'd changed, of course. It was her second night of spotlight, and she knew how to dress for an encore. I stood near the back, nursing a glass of something fizzy. The bubbles had long since faded, but I held it like a prop. Corinne passed by, resting a light hand on my arm. Her smile was warm, rehearsed. "Everything's going beautifully, don't you think?" I nodded. She kept walking before I could answer. Probably for the best. Russell cleared his throat at the front. He tapped a spoon against his glass, the universal cue for attention. A few guests paused mid-conversation. Someone's phone camera clicked. Another fork clinked quietly against a plate. "I want to say something," he began, raising his glass high, "about family." Elaine beamed beside him. Our family has always believed in loyalty, in legacy, in building something that lasts. There were nods, a few soft murmurs of agreement. "And tonight," he continued, "we want to recognize someone who has quietly, consistently, without complaint, held this family together in ways most of you will never see." My stomach dropped. I felt the room lean toward me. Russell turned, reaching into his blazer. He pulled out the envelope. "For Jenna," he said. "A token of our appreciation and an invitation." Applause. Light, polite. Corinne leaned in toward me, her perfume a mix of rose and something sharp. "Don't embarrass us," she said softly, teeth never breaking her smile. I took the envelope. My hands didn't tremble, but I could feel the heat in my cheeks. I opened it slowly, eyes catching on the number. 50,000. Before I could speak, Russell continued, voice full of pride. "We want you to co-sign the lease for the second gallery space. It's a bold expansion, and with this, you're investing in the future, in Elaine's future, in all of ours." Applause again, louder this time. Elaine dabbed at the corner of her eye like she might cry. I stared at the check. $50,000. Not for me, not really. It wasn't a gift, it was a buy-in. The edges of the room started to blur, like I'd stepped back from the center of a painting. My mouth went dry. Someone handed me another drink. Someone else raised a phone to capture the moment. I didn't smile. I placed the envelope carefully back on the table. The room stilled. "I'm not co-signing anything," I said, my voice low but steady. "You never asked. You just expected." A pause, then movement. Elaine's face tightened, her jaw clenched. "You're doing this here," she said under her breath, sharp and quiet. Russell stepped closer, his glass forgotten. "You think being useful means people owe you?" I shook my head once. "No," I replied, meeting his eyes. "But respect should be free." A silence fell over the room, not stunned, just heavy. A fork scraped against a plate somewhere. Someone coughed. The air felt too thick for comfort. Corinne's smile faltered just for a second. She reached for my arm, but I stepped away. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the envelope or make a speech. I just walked, slow, controlled, toward the exit. That was enough. As I reached the door, my phone buzzed. "Leora, I'm outside. Ready when you are." I exhaled, the tension leaving my shoulders like air from a balloon. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Let them sit with it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on Leora's couch, staring at the string lights above the window as they blinked softly in the early evening dim. The hum of her fridge filled the space between breaths, a steady, familiar sound that somehow held me together. Rain tapped gently against the glass like it was asking to be let in. My dress was still wrinkled from the gallery. I hadn't changed. The smell of kombucha and perfume clung faintly to the fabric. It was strange how a single night could shift everything, yet outside, life moved as if nothing had happened. The world didn't pause just because I had. Leora didn't say much. She handed me a mug of mint tea and tucked a soft quilt around my legs, like I might shatter without the weight. I didn't thank her, not because I wasn't grateful, but because words felt like a burden in that moment. She understood. That's why I was here. My phone buzzed. Again and again. Missed calls, texts, a message from Corinne. "Let's talk when you've calmed down." Another from Russell. "You made a scene. We need to fix this." Elaine's was more slippery. "Can we reset? You're overreacting, but I get it. Kinda." I didn't reply. I placed the phone face down on the side table. Outside, the rain picked up. Drops streaked the window in long, uneven lines. I watched them race each other down the glass over and over. Leora sat in the armchair across from me, her laptop open but ignored. She didn't ask what happened. She just waited, like she was holding a space open for me to fill when I was ready. I wasn't ready. Hours passed like that. No music, no TV, just two women in a small apartment surrounded by warmth and silence. When I finally moved, it was slow, deliberate. I stood, stretched my legs, walked to the kitchen counter, and opened my laptop. The screen lit up too brightly. I blinked, adjusted the brightness, and navigated to my email. First, I canceled my yoga subscription, then the meditation app. Then the monthly donation Elaine had signed me up for 2 years ago in support of women healing through intuitive dance. I had meant to cancel that ages ago. Next, I opened my banking dashboard and printed 6 months of credit card statements. Page after page spilled from Leora's printer. I stacked them neatly on the table, no longer flinching at the totals. The numbers were a language I understood better than the one my family spoke. In the morning, I heard the mail slot click. A thin envelope slid across the floor. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first, but when I picked it up, the loopy, uneven letters gave it away. Elaine. I opened it without expectation. Inside was a folded receipt from the brunch spot, Flora Cafe, the one with the avocado roses, and a note scrawled on hotel stationery. Starting with this, "I know it's not enough." There was no greeting. No apology. Just that. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I set the receipt on top of the stack of bank statements and walked back to the couch. The rain hadn't stopped. Leora was at the sink, washing 2 mugs. She glanced at me but didn't speak. I appreciated her restraint. Back at the table, I opened a new document. At the top, I typed, "What I want when no one's asking it," felt like a strange title for a list, but it was the truest one I could write. I stared at the blinking cursor. After a moment, I wrote, "Silence without guilt. Coffee in bed on a Tuesday." Enough money to say no without explaining a room that doesn't echo. Laughter that doesn't cost me anything. The right to stop carrying people who can walk. I leaned back. The list wasn't long, but it was heavy. Later that night, as the rain softened into mist, Leora lit a candle on the kitchen table. The flame flickered like it was nervous to be seen. She handed me another cup of tea and sat beside me on the floor, back against the cabinets. "I think I'm done," I said quietly. "Done with what?" she asked, not pushing. I stared into the steam rising from the cup. Fixing, explaining, covering. A beat passed. Then I whispered it like a truth I had finally earned. "I'm not their fixer anymore." Leora didn't answer. She just exhaled and rested her head against the cabinet, eyes closed. That silence felt better than any affirmation. The next day, I stood by her window watching the gray morning bloom over the rooftops. The sky was low, the kind that made you want to stay inside all day and rearrange your thoughts. My phone buzzed. A new message. Aunt May Lynn. Tea, no guilt, just honesty. I stared at it for a long time, letting the words settle. And then I smiled. Just a little. May Lynn didn't hug me when I stepped through her front door. She just looked me in the eye and said, "Let's not pretend you're here for pleasantries." The house smelled like ginger and old wood, just as I remembered. Her craftsman-style home hadn't changed much over the years. Books still lined the walls in mismatched stacks. Framed black and white photos hung slightly crooked, giving the impression that history lived here not as decoration but as presence. The lights were warm, not bright, and the air was thick with the quiet kind of respect she never asked for but always received. I slipped off my shoes by the door. My coat was still damp from the walk. Rain had followed me like a shadow all week, lingering even when the clouds didn't. She led me to the kitchen, where 2 mugs of chamomile tea waited on a wide oak table, scratched with years of use. She took her seat, wrapped her hands around the mug, and looked at me without blinking. "You don't need to explain," she said. "I wasn't planning to." Her eyes softened slightly. "Good." We sat in silence. The clock on the wall ticked, slow and honest. Somewhere in the house, floorboards creaked like an old dog stretching its limbs. It wasn't uncomfortable silence, just full. "You know," she began, "everyone in this family owes you." Their silence just proves it. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. She knew I knew. "I've watched you give," she continued. "Not just money, time, energy, presence. You've been the safety net, the emotional landfill, the calendar keeper, the invisible bridge." I stared into my tea. Steam rose in delicate waves. "No one names what they take from you," she said. "So I'll name it." And then she did. Tuition, rent, groceries, that retreat in Santa Cruz, those energy candles you never believed in, the time you took 3 days off work to help Corinne after her surgery, and no one even told the rest of the family. I pressed my thumb against the mug's edge, grounding myself in the heat. "You've been carrying all of us," she said, "and no one's even noticed the bend in your back." Before I could speak, before I even knew what I would say, the doorbell rang. May Lynn didn't flinch. "That'll be your sister." My stomach tightened. I wanted to move, to leave, to disappear, but my feet stayed planted. She opened the door, and there stood Elaine. No makeup, hair tied back, an oversized sweater that hung like surrender. She stepped inside without a word and nodded once to May Lynn, then to me. Her eyes were dark, not from mascara, but from something more honest. She carried a manila envelope, thin, soft around the edges like it had been held too long. She sat down across from me. No one spoke for a moment. Then, without theatrics, she said, "I came because I needed to stop lying, mostly to myself." I waited. "You saved me," she continued, "in a dozen ways I never said out loud. And I used you, also in ways I never said out loud." She slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a copy of a payment receipt and a brief handwritten note. "I've started covering Mom's home nurse, not for redemption, for balance." Her handwriting was shakier than I remembered. like she wasn't sure if she deserved to write clearly. I looked up at her. Why now? Elaine didn't fidget. For once, she didn't perform. Because I'm tired, she said. Tired of pretending I'm self-made while standing on a foundation you built. I didn't say yes. I didn't reach across the table. I didn't forgive. But I didn't flinch. We sat in silence again. This time, it didn't feel like a wall, just space. She glanced down, then back at me. I'm not asking for anything, not even a response. I just wanted to stop being a coward. I stood. Elaine tensed, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I looked at her. Really looked. Start with one thing, I said. Follow through. Then I walked toward the front door. Mei Lin didn't try to stop me, but just as I turned the knob, her voice carried gently across the room. They might never thank you, Jenna. That doesn't mean you weren't the backbone. I paused, not to cry, not to turn around, just to hear it. Then I stepped out into the late afternoon light. The rain had finally stopped. 2 months later, I moved into a studio above a used bookstore. The floors creaked with every step, and the windows fogged up every morning like the place was still deciding if it wanted to wake up. It smelled like old paper, steeped tea, and the quiet kind of freedom that doesn't announce itself. It wasn't large. A pull-out couch doubled as my bed. The sink dripped slightly when it got cold. The dishes were mismatched, most of them from thrift shops or donated by Leora, who insisted I needed at least 2 of everything in case I ever had company. But the space was mine. Every uneven corner, every chipped tile. And that mattered more than I thought it would. I took a deep breath the first night I slept there. The walls didn't hold echoes of anyone else's expectations. That was new. The fire escape became my favorite spot. I'd sit there with a mug of coffee each morning, watching the city stretch itself awake. Down below, people hustled through their routines. Up here, I had time. Not a luxury I'd ever allowed myself before. I signed up for a community business class at the local college. Just 1 night a week, introduction to small business management. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. A room full of women with notebooks and questions and dreams they were finally letting themselves say out loud. One evening after class, I stopped by the mailbox tucked under the stairs. A white envelope rested inside, my name written in my mother's precise, slanted script. I hesitated before opening it, hand steady but heart not quite. Inside was a folded letter. "You were right to leave," she wrote. "I hope I never make you feel small again." I sat on the bottom step for a long while, letter on my lap, trying to remember the last time Corinne admitted she was wrong. I couldn't, but it didn't matter. This wasn't a rewrite, it was a release. That weekend, a flyer arrived tucked into my doorframe. Elaine's Gallery. Free community art days, every Saturday. A photo of a mural in progress, children laughing, someone holding a paintbrush mid-stroke. I didn't feel pride. I didn't feel resentment either, just acknowledgement. People change. Sometimes they don't. That was hers to decide. Mine was to stop bleeding on the page when no one was reading. Leora came by most Sundays. She'd bring pastries, usually something flaky and full of butter, and we'd sit on the fire escape without saying much. Sometimes she'd talk about her week. Other times, we'd watch the sky shift colors in silence. One afternoon, she brought a candle labeled Fig and Resilience. I lit it that night just because it made me smile. I started journaling again, nothing fancy, just thoughts in the margins of receipts on the backs of class handouts. Little truths like, I can say no now and not apologize, and solitude doesn't mean failure. They weren't profound, but they were mine. It was late October when I walked into my first group therapy session. Folding chairs, lukewarm tea and paper cups. A facilitator named Karen who wore oversized glasses and too many bracelets. The kind of woman who'd seen enough not to flinch at anything. We went around the room introducing ourselves. Some shared full stories, others just gave names. When it was my turn, I said, "Hi, I'm Jenna. I used to think love meant disappearing, but now I think it starts when you stop." No one clapped. No one gasped. but one woman across the circle gave a small nod, like she knew exactly what I meant. Later that night, walking home under a sky just starting to snow, I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder what anyone thought. I just breathed. Back at my studio, Leora was already there. She handed me a blanket and poured 2 cups of tea without asking what kind. We sat on the fire escape, our knees touching lightly, watching flakes dust the rooftops. Neither of us spoke. There were no confessions, no dramatic goodbyes, just the sound of our mugs settling on metal, the sky blurring at the edges, and the warmth of not needing to explain anything anymore. Healing didn't mean erasing them. It meant finally choosing me. Some mornings now, I sit on the fire escape with a warm mug and nothing urgent to fix. Just breath, just sky, and the quiet knowledge that I chose this peace. Not borrowed, built. In families, love often gets tangled in unspoken rules and old debts. But real healing begins when we stop keeping score and start seeing each other as people, not roles. Sometimes choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's how you finally show up whole. If this story reminded you of a quiet strength you once found or are still searching for, feel free to share your thoughts. I'd love to know how you've learned to choose peace too.